is ring announcer Thomas Triber. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the time has arrived for Inside Boxing Weekly. So here are your hosts, Mike Goodpaster, John Einreinhofer, and Jeremiah Preisser on the Grueling Truth Sports Network.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Inside Boxing Weekly on the Grueling Truth Sports Network, brought to you by the Retired Boxers Foundation. Make sure you check them out on Facebook. I'm your host, Mike Goodpaster. As always, we want to thank Thomas Triber for giving us the introduction. It's the only way that we could get Jeremiah's dream of being on Showbox to seem like it was starting to come true. So let me welcome in, of course, my co-host. First up, Jeremiah Preisser.
Yeah, thanks for that. That was kind of my dream. I mean, I didn't really want to put in the physical work to, get there. So I figure, this is the best substitute. But I'm happy to be on. I'm always happy to be on. Let's talk some boxing, guys.
Well, you could always use steroids. That would get you ready. You still have to lift a little bit, though. And, of course, next up, last but not least, help me welcome to the show, John Einreinhofer. How you doing, John?
Glad to be here, Mike. And as I was going to add to that, we get to have Thomas Triber introduce us, and we don't even have to take PEDs to do this show. So. Yeah,
but me and Jeremiah still do, but we cycled off a couple weeks ago, so we've only got trace elements. So if anybody checks us, we'll just say it was because of tainted meat. All right, first up, we're going to talk about probably the greatest fight since March 1971 in the heavyweight division. I mean, Lucas Brown against, of course, Dillian White. I think I was right on this one, guys. This was horrible. We'll start off with you first, John.
Mike, I'm going to reluctantly concede to you on that. This one was not fun. It was awful. I thought it was going to be a fun brawl. Dillian White's Dillian White. He did his job, what he had to do. I always give some points for that. You don't get as many points from me as if you stop a dangerous opponent. But when you're in with somebody that shows absolutely nothing, like Lucas Brown did on Saturday, you get rid of them. You don't say, I had to play it safe and get a decision and things like that. Now, I'm giving White all I can here. With that said, I want to make a quick analogy, even though it's in the lower weights, because I think a lot of people need a reality check here. When John Molina outboxed the extremely, extremely limited and defensively challenged Ruslan Provodnikov, and to Molina's credit, he was a big underdog in that fight. He did not become a great boxer against Terrence Crawford after that, okay? Because Dillian White, looked like he had some sort of boxing skill against Lucas Brown. Does not mean that he has anything for Deontay Wilder, and in fact, Wilder will blow him out should Eddie Hearn insist on White making that sacrifice to get paid next.
Wait a second, real quick, John. I think, John, real quick, you owe an apology to Ruslan Provodnikov, though, because he is Sugar Ray Robinson compared to being Lucas Brown.
No argument there. But Lucas Brown was an advertisement for PEDs working on Saturday night, because how the heck he was ever able to get even a past his prime, and Chigaev, who is smallish heavyweight, really able to get him out of there, whatever stage Chigaev was at, is pretty inexplicable from what we saw from Brown Saturday. But Brown, he's 38 years old. I mean, this victory just, White did what he had to do, but this is meaningless for White in terms of elevating his status or anything like that. People need a reality check. And anybody who's into this alphabet nonsense, who was going to try to claim because Lucas Brown used PEDs to get the WBA regular title before he was then stripped for using PEDs, was a former world champion. That's absurd. Okay, so let's just a reality check. Not all British fans. There are British fans who are in reality about British boxers, and there are British fans who are not in reality about British boxers, and British fans who are trying to elevate Dillian White and say that Wilder really needs to get by him to fight Anthony Joshua are British fans who are not in reality about what some British boxers are bringing to the table.
All right, so Jeremiah, can Dillian White beat a Deontay Wilder or an Anthony Joshua? We already know he can't beat Joshua because he got beat by him And it blows me away that, he had one moment in that fight where he was competitive and everybody's kind of lived off that. It's kind of like when Ronaldo Snipes knocked Larry Holmes down once, even though he lost every round. People read too much into it. But do you think White would have a chance against Joshua? Or Wilder,
I mean, the way the heavyweight division is, it's just about, anybody has a chance. I mean,
except for
it's
Lucas
not as
Brown. Lucas Brown doesn't.
Yeah, I do think
right. That's right.
Yeah, I think Lucas Brown has probably been confined to the status of, probably being a gatekeeper for, up and coming heavyweights at this juncture.
I would think more like a bouncer at a club.
He does look like that, doesn't he? I think that's maybe that's his future after boxing. But yeah, I mean, does Dillian White have a chance? Yeah, but it's a real small one. I mean, I didn't really see anything there. I mean, again, as John said, it looked like he was displaying some boxing ability. But when you have a plotter, and Lucas Brown who displayed terrible defense, I just don't think we can make too much of that. But White, his technique wasn't that good. His jab wasn't that fast. His jab was the best it had ever been. But again, we're going back to the poor defense and whatnot of Brown. So, yeah, I mean, he's got a chance. I just don't think that, fighting Deontay Wilder is going to do much except what Eddie Hearn wants it to do, and that's put them on the same card together, have Wilder, beat Dillian White. And from a promotional standpoint, I guess I understand a little bit because you could put him on the same card and it will, sort of endear Wilder a little bit more to the British fans if he goes over there and knocks him clean out. That's what I would expect. That's what I expect is what's going to happen. I mean, and I think that's why Eddie Hearn is upset that Deontay Wilder didn't make the trip over, to the Joshua Parker fight, so they could build a little bit more. And so he could say, hey, well, you got to get past Dillian White first. It is what it is at this juncture, but, I'm not buying he needs to fight him. But if you look at the stupid alphabet trinkets and their arbitrary rankings, White is number one, and he's mandatory for Wilder.
Yeah, I just want to know where Manuel Char fits into all this.
He's probably real high up in the WBA's ranking, but hey, he's got to fight the ferocious Fresno Kendo.
Are they still
fighting?
Well,
let's remember WBA rules require the super champion to give the regular champion a shot. So is anybody saying that we need Manuel Char and Anthony Joshua? I mean, the alphabet stuff's ridiculous. When they start throwing White in as he's got the WBC silver title and number one ranking, that's nonsense. The promoters look at the alphabets when they want to. When they don't want to, they ignore them, which they should be ignored anyway. So I'm just not buying Hearn with this. Wilder and Joshua need to happen now. Wilder knocked out Ortiz, who's 10 times more dangerous than Dillian White. There's no need for any more delay. And anybody that buys into it, that to me, that's their problem if Eddie Hearn can fool them that easily.
I don't think there's any heavyweight that's 10 times better than Dillian White because I don't think him are very good. But I mean, it's hard to beat. Maybe he's 10 times better than Lucas Brown now, but I digress on Lucas Brown because he seems like he would be a relatively pleasant human being if I ever met him. I just threw that in so I wouldn't get my ass kicked if I ever met him. So next up, we've got on the undercard.
Mike, he'll be on your Legends of Boxing show in 5 years, and you have to be on good terms.
I don't think he will. I really don't think he'll ever be on the Legends of Boxing show.
Give it 5 years. Who knows?
I don't think so. I don't think that I will ever be able to get on the air and say, "Welcome to the Grueling Truth's Legends of Boxing show." My guest today is Lucas Brown.
Maybe not, but I'd be willing to do it if we could get Ricky Hatton that way.
Oh yeah, if we could get Ricky Hatton, because there's only one Ricky Hatton.
That's right, and Ricky Hatton was his trainer.
Yeah, so if we could get Ricky Hatton, so I changed everything I said. I think Lucas Brown should probably get a shot at Joshua or Wilder next. Next up, we have a guy that maybe would be a good opponent for Lucas Brown and David Price. 22-4. He's going to fight Alexander Povetkin. I I mean, David Price is going to fight Alexander Povetkin. The only thing I can say on this fight, Jeremiah, is I'm glad Alexander Povetkin is at least really old, so this might last more than a round.
Yeah, I mean, I like the pause after you said Price is fighting Povetkin because you didn't. I don't think there was too much to add to that, because we know what David Price is. I mean, he's been knocked out a number of times already by lesser men than Alexander Povetkin. What else do you expect? I mean, there's always a chance. I mean, it's not as if David Price doesn't have ability; he just doesn't have a chin. And Povetkin, say what you want about his ped use. He's been a top 10 guy for what, a decade now? I mean, this isn't a guy who's been bumming around the fringe for a while. It's just there's just a mismatch there in terms of ability, in terms of just skill overall. A lot of people would like to see Price overcome. It would feel like justice would be served, and Price, because he has fought guys. Tony Thompson, when he fought him, he tested positive for a banned substance. When he fought Irkin Temper, the blood test came back positive as well. So it would feel as if David Price would get some justice. And I understand that line of thinking, and credit to David Price himself, because he still believes in himself. But I just don't see it happening. I mean, in the heavyweight division, I often give a guy at least a little bit of a chance. And I think there's somewhat of it here. I think Povetkin's on the plus side of 37 too, but I just don't see it happening. And I guess this just gets Povetkin closer to some shot at some guy who holds some trinket somewhere, and credit to him. I just think he's going down hard in this one, and maybe he's carried out on a stretcher.
Yeah, and if you look at it with losing to Thompson and Tepper, Christian Hammer I don't think tested positive for anything, and he knocked him out also, and that was just a year ago. And, right. I mean, let's face it, Alexander Povetkin won a pretty easy unanimous decision over Christian Hammer, I think, in his last fight in December. David Price is a talented fighter. He was a talented amateur. But it seems like after 3 rounds, John, he's pretty much shot his load.
Well, Price is a huge underdog. I think if you want to look at the boxing part of it, what Price needs to do here, he's 6'8". He's been known as not having great stamina. This has got to be his opportunity to pull his best Corey Sanders imitation and just, he's got a high KO percentage and just go out, throwing some big right hands, throwing some bombs and just letting it go. And if he gets Povetkin out of there in a shocker, then he moves on to glory. And if not, he gets stopped, but he's going to get stopped anyway. So sometimes, though, a fighter, just can't mentally accept that that's what needs to be done because you're going to take some shots doing that if when you open yourself up and if you run out of gas. So either way, it's got a chance of not ending well for you, but it gives somebody like Price a chance at victory. The problem with Price is that he's got 18 knockouts in 22 fights, but when Audley Harrison is your best KO victim, that doesn't say a lot about what your KO percentage means. And if there's something that worries me for Price more than anything, it's probably that, because the one thing he could do, being a guy 6'8" with 18 knockouts in 22 fights, would be throw some bombs at Povetkin early and maybe land something and get him out of there. But when you look at the cast of characters he has stopped, the power might not even be real. Every heavyweight's got some power, but I mean, power that would justify that kind of KO percentage. So
the other thing, real quick, John, is this: when you talk about his power, the biggest problem may not even be his power. It's just how many times has Povetkin even been hurt? Yeah,
Povetkin has never been stopped, and Klitschko, roughed him up. Had him in some degrees of trouble. But, yeah, he doesn't have a history of getting rocked, and that is also something I thought about in this fight. But my thinking there is he's 38 years old, assuming that there's decent testing for this fight. Maybe he's got his own high-level version of Lucas Brown where, he's been on the PEDs and now he isn't. And makes
There's
him
no
more
high-level version of Lucas Brown, John. Come on.
I'm trying to make the best case for Price I can.
You can't.
Mike,
that's your best case to say somebody might be a rich man's Lucas Brown. Come on.
But what I think is interesting, though, to me is the non-boxing part of it. I do find it kind of interesting the way Hearn is obviously proven to be a good promoter, and he's a smart promoter. And I think he thinks out the chess game. And I think when he tries to market a Dillian White for Wilder, or all of a sudden he's got Price against Povetkin in the UK, not only is he cashing these guys out, he's also looking at the chessboard at his best case scenario, where if Dillian White was to land some crazy bomb against Wilder and knock him out, or David Price was able to land some crazy bomb against Povetkin and knock him out, voila, what does he have? He's got an all-British showdown that's going to sell huge that he can justify, and he's going to have guys who really don't have a chance against Anthony Joshua just because they landed one bomb in a previous fight. So I think Hearn thinks it out that far, and I think Povetkin and Price is in the UK for a reason. I think that's one reason. Probably the other reason is, as we discussed last week, I mean, I'm with Jeremiah there. He and I have agreed on that. I think that Hearn is looking at a 38-year-old Povetkin as a possibility for Joshua that might be sort of a little bit like Wilder Ortiz, where you get a guy who's a bit older, who has been dangerous, but now he might be checked more on the PEDs, and he's getting older, and you can get a KO over a guy like that that's going to carry more credibility than if you pick out an unknown name that's not very dangerous.
Like Lucas Brown.
Right, like a Lucas Brown, who maybe, who knows, maybe Lucas Brown will be finding himself in a WBA eliminator against David Price in 2 years, and they'll both have another shot no matter what.
I actually,
not impossible to miss out.
I actually wouldn't be surprised if Joseph Parker loses and then Joseph Parker fights Lucas Brown. I mean, that would make some geographical sense.
Yeah, Australia to make some money then.
It might give Joseph Parker a chance to score a knockout too, which he hasn't been able to do against anybody of note. And not that Lucas Brown would be of note at this point, but Parker's not hurting anybody lately.
Yeah,
Lucas
and that
Brown was never of any note at any time. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and that makes some sense. And funny enough, imagine if David Price and Dillian White did win. You know, if Dillian White overcame Wilder and Price overcame Povetkin, you could then pair Dillian White up in a rematch with Anthony Joshua, and then you could have David Price probably fight the winner of Hey Bellew.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I think Hearn thinks about these things. I think he thinks it out that far.
Well, that's what he's supposed to do. He's in the business to make money. You get an upset or two, you can make even more money than what you could have without the upsets. Next up, that brings us to some form of a heavyweight championship fight, I guess. Anthony Joshua versus Joseph Parker. You get the number 1 and the number 2 heavyweights in the world right now. Jeremiah, what do you think?
Well, what I think is the alphabet stuff's a load of nonsense. I mean, that's the sort of stuff that Showtime's trying to sell us, and getting into it with the former heavyweight champion Lennox Lewis because of it. I mean, it's for what it is. I mean, it's the universally recognized number 1 heavyweight against a guy who's a top 5. Yeah. I mean, I don't think that
top 3.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, in terms of sure. I mean, whatever. It doesn't matter to me. Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, it's not a particularly exciting fight because Parker hasn't exactly enthralled us with his recent performances, but because of his resume, he's earned his spot. I think that Josh will probably come in a little bit lighter this time. I'm hoping he doesn't pack on so much muscle, because that's when he starts with his David Price impression and he starts blowing out of his butt, in 3-4 rounds. I mean, and that's his biggest shortcoming as a heavyweight. He's just too muscle bound. I mean, those sort of guys typically don't have good stamina, and Joshua, for as much as he trains, he shows that. But I do think Joshua, for those shortcomings, I still think he's a good, skilled heavyweight. His combinations are rock solid. You don't often see that in a heavyweight anymore. His jab's pretty good. Parker, I think, is going to come in light too. I think he's going to try to I think his goal is probably to come in light and be the quicker of the two. And I think it could pose some interesting stylistic challenges if, Parker can overcome the first 4 or 5 rounds because he has shown the ability to fight 12 if necessary. So his work rate might be able to give Joshua some problems. But I think in the end, Joshua's just the sharper of the two. I think he's probably going to work on his jab and, again, be lighter, be a bit quicker. So I don't think there's going to be much of a deficit there. And I think ultimately his power is going to play. I think his power is going to be the biggest force in this fight, and I think he's going to stop Parker, at around 7 or 8. But I think it's a solid fight. I don't give Parker a big shot, but he's got somewhat of a shot. And but I got Joshua by a TKO later in the fight.
Yeah, my biggest question in here is not how hard Joshua hits, John. It's how good of a punch Parker can take.
Well, to me, there's no way Parker's the number 2 heavyweight in the world. This, in terms of competitiveness, this fight's a lot of alphabet hype. But I agree with Jeremiah. By default in this heavyweight division, Parker's a top 5 guy.
He's beaten better competition than Wilder. Wilder looked like crap against Ortiz for 5 rounds. He lands 1 punch. That's about it. So the thing is this. You sit here and you talk about Joseph Parker can't knock anybody out. I mean, the question is, can Deontay Wilder beat somebody if he doesn't knock him out, especially somebody that's a high-level boxer? Joseph Parker, I think, is a high-level boxer. I just question, can he take a punch? Can he punch hard enough to keep Joshua off of him? In the end, I think it comes down to this. If Joshua doesn't gas out, there's no way Parker beats him because I think Joshua was better. But to sit here and to totally write Parker off as having no shot, especially against Joshua or a Wilder, I think is absurd just because the level of competition none of them have ever fought.
I got no problem writing Parker off here. Wilder knocked out Luis Ortiz, who everybody had as the number 2 or 3 heavyweight in the world when they had him in the ratings before the PED controversy came up. He's a much more dangerous opponent than anybody that Joseph Parker's fought by far. Joseph Parker, when he was coming up against lesser competition, let's say before the Takam fight, and I'm not even that high on Takam like a lot of other people are, as this rugged, dangerous veteran. Despite his record, I've never really saw him that way. I think he's a guy who plods. He's very limited offensively. And you could see in that fight, to me, some people thought that was an impressive performance. I did not find it to be an impressive performance. That was, to me, the first fight when I started to see the holes in Parker. Really for a guy who just uses his left jab when he's in against better competition, and he's got an okay left jab, that's his best punch at this point. He's kind of a mediocre boxer as he's gotten in against better competition with a pretty good left jab, but that's about it. But he's not all that active over the course of the 12-round distance, even though we know heavyweights throw less punches. But that's why he's had some of these close decisions in fights like with Ruiz and Huey Fury. There's a lot of rounds where he's just not doing that much. He sticks out his left jab, and he doesn't do that much else, and that's been enough for him to win. But
that's pretty much what really Wilder does,
to me. But the Wilder knocks people out, Mike.
Okay.
Parker hasn't been knocking out higher level competition.
Neither is Wilder. He knocked out Luis Ortiz.
Mike Parker could even knock out Razvan Kojanyu, who I saw get knocked unconscious on ESPN's Boxino by Donovan Dennis, a guy that Jarrell Miller then bludgeoned into submission. That's really the fight that's got to stick out to people. Parker was supposed to fight Huey Fury the first time over in Australia, or actually that was in New Zealand, I'm sorry. They had to sub in Kojanyu, who's not even anything close to a regular contender. He'd been knocked out on ESPN Boxino, and Parker couldn't stop the guy. Then, Huey Fury, he had some majority decision with. And you saw the odds makers get down on Parker after the Ruiz fight, which I was also found him to be very unimpressive in. You saw that then when he was supposed to fight Huey Fury in New Zealand, he was just a very slight favorite. That was definitely a big change, the way Parker had been viewed previously. Then in the rematch with Huey Fury, not rematch, so when the fight came off, then in the UK, he was about even money after that Kojanyu fight. So, you could see the odds makers have been getting down on him. Joshua's been a big favorite this whole time this fight's been signed. I see the odds close slightly, but I feel sorry for those people who put their money on Parker. I just think it comes down to I see a little bit in Anthony Joshua like I saw in Deontay Wilder when Deontay Wilder fought Molina and he fought Duhapa. He wasn't in the greatest shape. He was 10 pounds heavier than he should have been. And you saw that with Joshua against Takam coming in at 257. It's too heavy for Joshua at his age, this stage of his career. There's rumors he's at 247. I don't believe that's been confirmed, but assuming he's taken off about 10 pounds, I've said that before about Wilder's weight. When you see him at 220 or below, he's a much better fighter. And I think for Joshua, the 257 was too heavy. And I agree with Jeremiah. He's got to watch his stamina. He's a muscle-bound guy. So I would just qualify it with this. If Joshua's in shape and he comes in at 247, I don't think Parker gets past the sixth round. I still think Joshua beats him even if he comes in lesser shape, but he may have the fight go longer than he needs to if, say, he comes in at 257 or something like that, which he shouldn't. But I like Joshua. I like Wilder, obviously. I think they're clearly the top two heavyweights in the world. I just don't think that Joshua should have any problems with Joseph Parker. I think Eddie Hearn saw the most recent performances of Joseph Parker just like the rest of us did, and that's when there became a need to get this WBO belt. And in terms of alphabet history, I think all fans also need to remember how ridiculous it was. Tyson Fury beat Vladimir Klitschko, and the IBF and the WBO stripped Fury because he was going to fight a rematch with Klitschko. So, these guys are not legitimate champions that have these alphabet belts at this juncture, especially Joseph Parker. He's a top 5 heavyweight by default, but I don't give him much of a chance against Anthony Joshua.
Well, I don't think either one of these guys. I mean, the closest one to having a claim is Joshua, but none of them have a claim. Jeremiah?
That's absolutely true. I mean, people get too stuck on this stuff, and they get stuck on the whole world title thing, and it's all just a bunch of bullshit. I mean, it's okay, I hold a trinket, I hold a trinket. I mean, and not only that, the alphabet soup organizations, they don't apply their rules uniformly. They never have, they never will. I mean, wasn't it something like the IBF demanded Joshua to defend their title in so many days or negotiate or something, and then they let him off, unlike they did with Tyson Fury. I mean, with people like Mauricio Suleiman and Gilberto Mendoza Jr. coming to the defense of people before the evidence is laid bare. I don't understand why we take these guys seriously anymore. But let's get to the good stuff. Let's get to the number 1 and 2 guys fighting in the heavyweight division. That's all I really want to see. That's what I want to see in more divisions. I mean, forget the alphabet trinket stuff. Let's just get the fights between the best of the best.
All right. I would like to say hi to Pablo Baez if he's listening, because I haven't figured out a way to work him in yet.
We love you, Pablo.
John would be mad. John, do you want to say hi to Pablo?
Well, let's see, how can we work? I'm trying to think how Pablo Baez would work in with the alphabet organizations. There's always a way.
It's too
to
late.
In,
you've
so
already ruined it. You should have brought it up already.
Wouldn't it be Lucas Brown would be the Pablo Baez of the heavyweight division?
You don't ever talk about Pablo Baez like that. Jeez.
Lucas Brown having any type of world title, even if it was for a minute before he was stripped for PEDs, would be a Pablo Baez moment.
Here's something interesting that I just found out. Pablo Baez is still with us. He's still alive, too.
How'd you find that out?
I just Googled his name, and it had the date he was born, but it didn't have a date that he died, so I figured he's still alive.
Where was he from?
I don't even remember now. I took it off of there. John knows.
John
was the
Colombia?
president of the... I think he was, but John, you were the president of the Pablo Baez fan club, correct?
No, I just remember that Pablo Baez Thomas
Dominican
Holmes
Republic.
Fight. And then
so he's not too far away.
And I do remember that he might have fought somebody else good after that who blew him out.
Breland.
Yeah, his last fight was Mark Breland.
Okay, that's right. I thought he resurfaced against somebody else good. I couldn't remember who it was.
They fought Donald Curry too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Also,
okay.
Gillies
Okay.
Olivia, who actually he beat, and Olivia was like ranked for a while, so that'll tell you about their rankings. Yeah, but he fought a
Yep.
lot of guys. He lost to a lot of guys that were pretty good.
Well, yeah, and it says Pablo Baez's residence is Los Angeles, California. So you never know.
Oh, there you
We
go.
might be able to get a hold of him.
Now, I can also tell you this. He actually had some good wins. He beat Zeferino Gonzalez. You remember Zeferino Gonzalez, don't you?
Yeah, he was that trial horse guy that fought everybody.
No, he was like he only fought like 25 fights, but he's the one that actually, when Duran was moving up to welterweight, he actually fought Duran on ABC with Howard Cosell doing the fight, and he actually put up a pretty decent fight.
Now I remember that fight. That's one of the ones I had in mind. But he popped up as a trial horse guy in some fights, if I recall. I'm not googling his record right now, but
yeah, he only fought 28 times. He was done by 1983, so I don't think he was around long enough to be a trial horse. But so his thing was this: he lost to Duran. He had one win after that, or two wins after that, and his career ended. He lost like 5 of his last 6 fights. But he lost to Bruce Finch.
that must be the part I'm thinking. That must be the part I'm thinking of.
Yeah, his trial horse period was like for 1 year. But he lost to Bruce Finch and James Hard Rock Green, and then he retired in 1983.
Well, I mean, when you fight
there you
Pablo
go.
Baez, your career's not going to go on for much longer, unless you're great.
He was like Marvin Hagler. He basically, once you fought him, you were never the same.
Right.
So, I don't know. So what's our prediction for Joshua and Parker, John?
I'm going to assume Joshua comes in shape, and I will define that so my predictions have meaning, which I would say, let's say 247 or under. And with that, I would think he'll take Parker out by the 6th round.
All right, Jeremiah.
Yeah. I said 7 through 8. I'm going to stick with that. I think, I just think Joshua's too good here.
By the way, Ricky Hatton said you're a dickhead. Seriously, because I just read this 8 hours ago. Ricky Hatton blasts dickhead trolls for Brown KO abuse. So, I remember you posting about how bad that fight was. So, Ricky Hatton, your hero, just called you a dickhead. Joshua Parker, to me, I think Joshua knocks him out in 2 rounds. And it's not because I don't think Parker's any good. I think he's a talented guy. It's just I don't think he's got the power. I think Joshua walks him down and takes him out in 2 or 3 rounds. If he does that, I mean, it's hard not to consider him the best heavyweight in the world. If it takes 7, 8, 9, 10 rounds or goes to a decision, then we still got to see Joshua Wilder. But I do think Parker is a really talented guy. I just think Joshua's too strong for him, and I think he will weigh in under 250, and I think he'll take care of this fairly quick. That's just my opinion. Jeremiah, any boxing news you want to discuss?
Yeah, I wanted to mention a few things. Josh Kelly, talented British welterweight, is on the undercard of that fight. I like what I see in the kid so far. He looks like one of those natural defenders. He has this innate sense about him where he just has a feel of where punches are going to be. He's a slippery guy who's in the Olympics. He's scheduled to fight the veteran Carlos Molina, who gave Erislandy Lara a tough fight years back. Was beating James Kirkland. Of course, he's many years past that now, and he's riding a 2-fight losing streak. One's Carlos Adames, and one is Ahmed El Moussaoui. I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but I remember Moussaoui because I believe he fought Jeff Horn and gave Horn a pretty good test. Speedy boxer type.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. I actually watched that fight, and Molina, I think for Kelly at this point, I think that's a good test. I like it. I also think that Ryan Burnett is on the undercard. That's another guy that I like. I liked his last performance. No, when he fought Lee Haskins is my favorite fight of his before, because Haskins was kind of like a poor man's Naseem Hamed. He didn't have nearly the power Hamed did, but he had this kind of awkward, upper body movement, and he's pretty slick, good counterpuncher. So I like what I see out of Burnett so far, and I'm hoping, and I think they're under the same promotional banner, that him and TT will get together.
All right. Any comments on those fights that you want to make, John?
Yeah, I do like Burnett a lot myself.
I like
he
Kelly.
really impressed me.
I like them both.
In that, he really impressed me in that Zaganoff fight. And he seems like he's got kind of everything: some skill, some heart, some stamina. Except he's not that big of a puncher, but of course he's at bantamweight, so you're going to have that sometimes. So I really do like the guy. What's just kind of unfortunate here is he's in a mismatch. I think the last time I checked, he's a minus 3,500 favorite. So I just wish they'd, at this point, have a better opponent for him. He did have his fight shown on tape in HBO in the United States last time. I think that was good because he showed something. So I'd like to see more of him in some better fights. But with those guys that are at 115 that could easily fight at 118, and Jeremiah mentioned TT. There should be some fights for him. McDonald's going to fight Inouye. I actually like McDonald a lot also. I think he's a very underrated fighter. That's going to be a tough assignment for him, but he's shown me enough that I wouldn't completely count him out, even though I'm sure he'll be a big underdog in Japan. I do think that, Kelly's a good prospect as well. But I think the only other thing to mention is, there was some things that, Kurt Emhoff, who we know, Boxing Esquire, he was tweeting some things about the Nevada State Athletic Commission regulations regarding PED use, and that they changed the regulations in 2016, which fortunately I am trained and do know how to read this stuff. So it is interesting to me that what will then occur most likely at that hearing, and this is worth clarifying, is, and this is probably what people started to look at, there's not really going to be any doubt under that regulation that Canelo is responsible for using the clenbuterol, even if he claims it's from meat. What then will come in is what is the penalty for that. In other words, if he can, it's a slight distinction, but there is a distinction there. In other words, there's not really going to be any doubt under those new regulations that he is responsible for that being in his system. That looks like it's pretty much gone. So he's going to be responsible. But what will then probably come in is if he introduces evidence to that he claims he got it from eating contaminated meat, does that then give Nevada the ability to, give him a lesser penalty or no penalty? And it's not necessarily the conspiracy type thing in the sense that this is what they did with Francisco Vargas. Now, I'm not advocating that would necessarily be right, but it might come down, it'll almost come down to the same thing we discussed previously, that it's going to be a burden on Canelo showing that he got that from contaminated meat. But there is a distinction that if he got it from contaminated meat, under Nevada's regulations as of 2016, that doesn't take him off the hook. So he's going to have to sort of mitigate it, as we would call it, where he's going to have to show it was from meat and that supposedly nothing then should happen to him. But with an April 10th hearing date and the fight being on May 5th, that says to me, though, why people are probably thinking the fight might be in jeopardy is there's probably some basis for that, because if Nevada is going to give him any kind of penalty, in other words, let's say he's suspended for 3 months, it's going to start the effective date of the test, and that goes beyond May 5th, that fight's off. So that's probably what people have changed that they're looking at now, where they're thinking that fight might be in some serious jeopardy.
Jeremiah?
Yeah, and I think that's the right way to proceed with, the going about these positive tests, especially with clenbuterol, because WADA, if you look at their protocol, there is no limit to how much clenbuterol you can have in your system and be considered, acting. You still get Yeah, right. You still get punished no matter how much you have in your system. And I think it's probably a good thing that, Nevada has adopted something similar, because obviously if WADA and people who are in the industry are taking it that seriously, I guess, Las Vegas is being a bit progressive on the issue by doing the same thing. But yeah, Dan Rafael on, for ESPN if you've been following him on Twitter, he's been at this a lot, saying that he doesn't think it's going to happen. He's been casting a lot of doubt on it. I'm still thinking that it goes through. Of course, we're just playing the waiting game. We're sitting on our hands right now, waiting for a judgment to be ruled. But I still think the fight's going to go through. I still think there's too much money involved. Of course, everybody may look at that. Everybody who's involved in the promotion may look at that and say, hey, it's kind of killing it, because from what I heard, HBO, they weren't running the commercials for Golovkin Alvarez. Some of the other people involved in the promotions were doing the same thing where they weren't running their promotions. So I suppose there's a possibility, but I still think there's too much money involved. If the fight were to fall through, I think Billy Joe Saunders is probably on tap. I mean, he pulled out of his fight with Murray, due to an injury. And I think that he's probably playing the waiting game, so waiting in the wings to see if maybe he can get the shot. And I think that would be preferable to Murray. I mean, I'd rather see Golovkin Alvarez because I think it does much more for Golovkin's legacy than a Saunders fight. But a Saunders alternative would be just fine.
Yeah, but now does it do more for his legacy? I mean, does this hurt Canelo's legacy, John?
Yes, it hurts Canelo's legacy. It does. It's going to hurt. He's young enough and he's got enough talent that he could bounce back from it. If he was, say, 35 or something like that, it might be tough. But although he would have a lot more under his belt then too, so works both ways. But he'll have time to I think he'll have time to rebound. I don't like it. I think Jeremiah, I agree with his point. I want to add, I like the Nevada regulation that they put in 2016. I think it's excellent because a lot of times in legal proceedings, one side can leverage the other by making them spend a lot of money. And in the high stakes world of boxing, Nevada is still a state athletic commission, even though it's the resources of the state. If you put the burden on the state to have to prove that say somebody like Canelo did it, even after he's tested positive, they've got to use a lot of resources, investigation. The person can keep saying, "Oh, I didn't mean to do it," and we remember that from baseball all the time and other sports, that these guys always had their excuse always was, "Oh, I took that in a GNC supplement. I didn't know it was in there," which we know was bunk most of the time, and they were getting away with it. This regulation makes it that you're responsible for whatever you put into your system. If you come up positive, it's your problem. So that's going to put anybody on guard, and I think that's what I was alluding to last week when I was saying, really, you can't trust the alphabets on the whole. It comes down to big state athletic commissions, even though they're not perfect, like Nevada, New York. And let me say, I think that the British have taken a strong stance against PEDs. So, possibly the British Board of Boxing Control, I don't know exactly where they're at on it, but I think that they've not looked kindly on those types of things. So I think that that's good. But, strong commissions like this have to put in these kind of regulations and where the money is made for the boxers. And maybe that will be enough of an intimidating factor to make the use less prevalent. But I think that, and there are people who obviously listen to our podcast who care about this stuff. Obviously, casual fans don't, or lesser fans. But I think one way from a boxing purist perspective, even though I've been a fan of Canelo's up to this incident, I thought he did well in the first fight. I thought he won. But there's a way that this could work out for boxing order, so to speak, which is, let's say Canelo gets suspended on April 10th. Then I would think in this modern era of PEDs, he's got to lose any claim he had to the lineal middleweight belt. Saunders fought on HBO last time. Jacobs is with HBO now. Golovkin's with HBO. I would think that to the boxing purists, transnational, even if they're going to have credibility and Canelo's been suspended, you would think that if Golovkin then fights either Saunders or Jacobs, that would be a claim for the vacant lineal middleweight title, which to me at least would have some significance then. I don't think it has to be Saunders because he's got the WBO belt. I don't care about that. But I think since Saunders and Jacobs would both be ranked high enough that if Golovkin wants to fight Jacobs in a rematch or take on Saunders, I think either of those would be acceptable. It doesn't have the glamour of a Canelo fight. It's a shame, but Canelo did what he did, and we've got to move on from there. So that might be an acceptable thing. And where I'm on that theme, let me just, before I stop, say that the more I've thought about it, I'm liking, even though I think Lomachenko wins it easily, I'm starting to like the Linares-Lomachenko fight more, especially on ESPN. And I think that there would be logic to me that would also be for a linear lightweight title. Linares is already the ring champion, but I think in this day and age, we don't need all these divisions. Just because Lomachenko was at 130, we don't need him to beat up a no-hoper at 135 to be eligible to fight for the title, the real title against Linares. So I would say that, for anybody that's got that vacant, which I looked at it that way, and I know Transnational did, that would be a worthy title fight, or a policy drawn where that would be a worthy title fight.
All right, back to the Triple G Canelo, Jeremiah. I think this. I don't think there's any way Billy Joe Saunders fills in. I think you're more likely to see like a Gary O'Sullivan fill in on March 5th than anything else, because I think there could be some money made on a Saunders fight in the future. I don't see why they would rush that there. I do think that Canelo Triple G are going to fight, but if they don't, I think a guy like O'Sullivan could be what you see.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's possible because with these, boxing has become an event sport. So, you need months and months of promotion.
Well, not just that, though. If Billy Joe Saunders is going to fight Canelo Alvarez, if I'm Billy Joe Saunders' trainer, why do I want to take that fight at the start of April with exactly 3 or 4 weeks to prepare instead of having maybe a full training camp?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. But the thing is, Saunders had already been in preparation for the Murray fight and was scheduled to fight in short order. So I think they're both probably physically prepared for the fight. But seeing as the injury was there, I think they rescheduled the Murray fight. I think late April. I'd have to go back and check.
Yeah, I just think there's a big difference between fighting Gennady Golovkin and Martin Murray.
Sure, no, absolutely, and as I was saying, I think it's an event-driven sport. So, if Golovkin and Saunders were to do it, they'd like months of promotion, and I'm sure Golovkin wouldn't mind going over to the UK and fighting. I mean, to his credit, and I think he deserves more credit for this. He's been a traveling guy. I mean, he doesn't mind. I mean, remember the good years when he was going to Monaco, at least once a year. He was fighting 4 times. He'd go to Monaco, go to the East Coast, he'd go to the West Coast. He didn't care, and that's one thing that I've always really liked about him. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it fell through and a guy like O'Sullivan would be on tap, maybe. But I think that no matter what happens, Golovkin has to go back to what he used to be. And that's what I was talking about, where he was fighting 3-4 times a year. That's one of the things that endeared him to fans. That's one thing that made him different. In this era of guys who hold titles fighting twice a year, Golovkin was different. And that's part of how he became who he is right now. Fighting in different geographical settings, learning English. The broken English has been one of his strong points, actually, because it just sounds funny. But O'Sullivan would be fine if Alvarez does get a suspension. I wouldn't be surprised, if we're talking about O'Sullivan getting the fight first, if he fights O'Sullivan and then he fights Billy Joe Saunders in the summer, and then maybe, depending on how long the suspension is, if that happens, maybe fighting Canelo Alvarez or Daniel Jacobs in a rematch later in the year. I mean, that'd be a damn good year for Golovkin. I did want to say, it was one of the points that John made, and now I'm kind of forgetting it, but in regards of Linares, Lomachenko, I think that Mikey Garcia is being pressed to make a decision about whether he wants to fight above 135 or go down to 135, and I think he might be more inclined to stay at above 135 because Linares and Lomachenko.
He did make that call that he's going to stay with the 140.
Okay, yeah, I didn't see anything concrete. I didn't see a quote from him, but yeah, you could be right. The unfortunate thing is
he's dumping the Alphabet 135 belt.
Yeah.
Okay, so 135. Yeah. So I mean, the thing about Lomachenko and Linares is, unfortunately, most ranking organizations aren't going to recognize Lomachenko as number 2, even though by all accounts he should be. I mean, what does he need to do? I mean, if he didn't fight Linares, he would have just fought. He would have just whipped Ray Beltran's ass, and then he would have been number 2. So it all kind of seems all for naught. But yeah, I am looking forward to that fight because it's the best fight that can be made at lightweight. With Mikey Garcia not being there.
All right, guys, we got anything else?
Yeah, no, I agree with Jeremiah. That's what I was looking at. The Mikey Garcia being out of the picture. I was taking him out because he hadn't fought at lightweight for a year anyway, so I was starting to. Then I just read within the last week that he's going to stay with the IBF 140 title and I guess get rid of the WBC Alphabet 135. So, yeah, what I was throwing out there, again, this is for people that care about those type of things, which people that listen to us are going to be some of those people. I think a good policy to maybe look at the realities of modern boxing where there's 17 divisions that a lot of people look at, even though I think all three of us agree here that you only need 8, 9 at the most, is maybe if, Transnational and the Ring could add to their policies that somebody in the junior division below the traditional original 8 division is either champion rank 1 or 2, that in the discretion of the panel that person could be eligible to fight for the title in one of the original weight classes. Then you could still rank the 17 for people that want that, but you would then be more evaluating it as if there were only 8 or 9 divisions. And that's what I had in mind with the Lomachenko situation.
All right. And the middleweight champion of the world is Triple G, and it was before he beat Canelo, too.
Well, and I actually think that I'd actually like to research that. I'd like to research that because the Ring, if I'm not mistaken, they stripped Louis Neary pretty quickly after he beat Shinsuke Yamanaka for their 118-pound championship.
I thought it was like almost the same time they found out that he tested positive, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, from what I remember, and again, I'd have to do a little bit of research on this, but it was pretty quickly. I mean, damn near the day after. So I'd like to see, how that went and see if they're applying the rules fairly here because, I understand that the rankings for the Ring have been pretty consistent, but I do have some suspicion with that conflict of interest because you look at some of the daily mailbags, sometimes I read them, sometimes I don't, but you had Douglas Fisher, I think 3 weeks ago when he did his mailbag and he's like, Mexicans got to quit using this excuse. And then 2 weeks after he's like, oh, well, hold on. We gotta see whether or not Canelo Alvarez ate some street tacos or not. So I don't know, but I wanted to just kind of as a closing word for me, I just want to implore everybody to go to our boxing section or the sports section in general. I mean, we've got tons of different sports on there, but the boxing section I think is one of the best that you'll find on the internet. I mean, we just recently had Rob Day do a Q&A with Lee Selby, who's fighting soon. We've got our old-time boxing show, all sorts of podcasts, all sorts of lists, all sorts of video footage. Just go ahead and check that out.
All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Are we going to do a show after Joshua Parker?
Let's do it.
Are we going to do it late at night, or are we going to do it after the fight?
We should probably do it after the fight.
Remember,
yeah, let's do it.
The Final Four is on at that same point.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's do this. People plan. We will be on at 11 o'clock Eastern Saturday night to talk about Joshua Parker and the undercard to that fight and any other boxing news that comes between now and then. So you can watch the Final Four. When the Final Four is over, you can flip over and you can listen to a little bit of boxing talk with me, John, and Jeremiah, introduced, of course, by our favorite ring announcer, the ring announcer of legends, Thomas Triber. Do you like that? That was pretty good.
Yeah, I like that. That was smooth, man.
So catch us 11 o'clock Saturday night for the Joshua Parker show. We'll talk about that fight. We'll talk about what that's going to lead to. Then once again, John will defend Deontay Wilder. I'll tear him down. You guys know how this goes by now. So check back with us Saturday night. Make sure you go to iTunes, download the Grueling Truth app. Just search Grueling Truth in the iTunes store. You'll have it right there. So we're going to go ahead and wrap the show up. For Jeremiah Preisser, John Einreinhofer, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.